Benefits included low-cost mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business or farm, 1 year of unemployment compensation, and dedicated payments of tuition and living expenses to attend high school, college, or vocational school. What? Can we have that, please? Excuse me. I would like that. Thank you. That's awesome. So last year, there was a politician named Alexandra M. Hunt. She's a politician on Twitter who got a little bit of a backlash for, stating that sex should be a right. She backtracked a little bit on it and said, listen, this is actually what I meant. Please don't take this out of context, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. It was a bad way of putting it. And she got some backlash over it. So I commented on that at the time. And I made it kind of a men's rights video, right? I called it Progressive Politician Goes Full MGTOW, or does she? And you can find that on my channel. I uploaded it about 4 months ago. I rewatched like half of it. I did okay. It was very okay. But I think I made some pretty good points. Some of the points I made were that like true feminism is about men's rights as well as women's rights. It's about breaking down gender norms, right? It's about leveling the playing field as far as rights and income and expectations between genders, right? And across genders. While I do like being manly and looking and behaving like a man, I think I should be allowed to dress feminine, to be emotional, to, even work with kids, because it's kind of a stigma if you work with kids as a man. Oh no, you're creepy. Literally, I've gotten conservatives on my ass for like having worked with kids in the past, like in gymnastics, right? Really weirdo shit. They just hate men. I digress about that. So I made it about men's rights and how feminism ties into men's rights. And I do stand by that. I have not read over this yet. The post is called, Can People Stop Pretending That Feminists Fight for Meaningful Men's Rights? What they do is at best superficial, and at worst, they whitewash their own opposition to them. So he says, I was watching this leftist fellow I just found 1 to 2 days ago. He means me, of course. And he said what's in the image. Feminism is also about men's rights. It is true men's rights because we break down the gendered stereotypes, and men can be free to express their feelings. Men can grow up and play with girls' toys and wear girls' clothes if they want to, and wear makeup and wear, high heels if they want, or even beyond just wearing and playing with things, emotionally, they'll be so much more fulfilled. I've said this before, men are hollow shells oftentimes of what humans are supposed to be. I think that he literally just pulled that from the captions thing. So he continues. And can at least us acknowledge both how utterly contrary to the feminist movement this is. Feminists campaigned to make default custody to the mother, and then they blamed it on the patriarchal gender norms of care for children being a woman's job, when that's much closer to their own reasoning of, quote, female creative force, end quote, which patriarchy was suppressing for millennia. I need to read that again. Hold on. Okay, so I actually don't know if this is true, but let's go ahead and say that it is. I mean, default custody to the mother is not the worst policy, in my opinion, because after all, the mother did actually literally bear the child. So if anybody is its parent, I think if you're not looking at anything else like personality, crimes, job, ability to care for the child, whatever, I do think honestly that the mother has the most rights to the child, right? I personally think that's true, just based on the fact that she bore the child. Now, if it's an adopted kid, that's a different story. Before they got it, custody went to the father, because jobs were harder before the Industrial Revolution, so the only jobs women could do were either weaving, collecting crops, making soap, tending for animals. Men had the harder jobs of plowing, defense against bandits and wild animals, animal slaughter, forging and blacksmithing, war, etc. Only after the Industrial Revolution, which also brought for men mining and factory work, which I remind you only began to have standards of safety when women began to be employed, you could begin to say, quote, women were kept out of jobs, so of course they didn't have enough resources to provide for their kids alone. I mean, that's literally true. We did not allow women to do anything much besides, stay in the kitchen and have sex and have children, right? Like, that's it. Make dinner and get slapped around a little bit by her husband when he came home, because he had repressed anger and was working 16-hour shifts at Mr. John Copperfield's coal mine, right? Created models of domestic violence with men as the sole perpetuator, like the Duluth model, and actively opposed Pizzi's idea of intergenerational instead of gender-based violence. The Duluth model focuses on men who commit the crime of domestic violence and female victims. Its theory is based on an understanding of male power, control, and dominance as culturally and historically pervasive and which allowed, if not encouraged, men to control women, sometimes using violence. I mean, isn't that literally true? Like, men have kind of run the entire world since forever. Physical violence. Okay, so we got violence in the middle. Physical, sexual. Using coercion and threats, making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt her, threatening to leave her, to commit suicide, to report her to welfare, making her drop charges, making her do illegal things, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, making her feel guilty about the kids, using the children to relay messages. So this is the Duluth model of male power and control, I guess. I mean, I guess women could do some of this stuff, especially today. The Duluth model for DV treatment, domestic violence. I'm trying to understand this as best I can. The Duluth model approach, a commitment to shift responsibility for victim safety from the victim to the community. Shift responsibility for victim safety from the victim to the community and state. Okay. A shared collective mission and strategy regarding intervention that is based on a number of core philosophical agreements, a shared understanding of how interventions are to be accountable to victim safety and offender accountability, a shared understanding of how each agency's practitioners' actions either support or undermine the collective goals and strategy of intervention, shared definitions of safety, battering, danger, and risk and accountability, prioritizes the voices and experiences of women who experience battering in the creation of those policies and procedures. Coordinated community response, CCR. Written policies. So basically, the Duluth model, organizing method that prioritizes victim safety and offender accountability within a social change framework. The model guides organizers to build interventions within systems that are aligned with the lived experience of victims. The Duluth model creates a distinctive form of organized public response to domestic violence. It is characterized by clearly identifiable and largely shared assumptions and theories about the source of battering and the effective means to deter it, empirically tested intervention strategies that build safety and accountability into all elements of the infrastructure of processing cases of violence, well-defined methods of interagency cooperation guided by advocacy programs. I see nothing wrong with the Duluth model. It seems good. Created models of domestic violence with men as the sole perpetuator, like the Duluth model. I don't think the Duluth model is about men being the sole perpetuator of violence. It usually assumes that men are the perpetuator of violence in most circumstances, as they are. That is factual. That is just a fact. Men tend to be the perpetuators of violence in domestic violent disputes. Like, that's what happens. That's the reality. Can it be women? Sure. But you could also apply the Duluth model to a woman in that situation based on what I've seen here. It just so happens that men overwhelmingly have the power in the relationship. Like, that is the traditional model of a relationship. That's just what has always been correct. That's what's always been true, I mean. Not correct, true. So we know what the Duluth model is, basically. It's just like a model for preventing domestic violence based on patterns and using a community strategy and shifting blame away from the victim and toward the perpetuator. That's all it is. Actively opposed Pizzi's idea of intergenerational instead of gender-based violence. Aaron Pizzi, intergenerational violence versus the big lie. Interview with domestic violence pioneer Aaron Pizzi. Domestic violence can have devastating effects on mental health, not only for the victims, but for children who witness domestic violence. It's such an important social issue that if you were told that someone was the pioneer of domestic violence services in the UK, you would expect them to be a recognizable figure, if not a household name. Aaron Pizzi founded the first battered women's shelter, now called Refuge, in the modern world in 1971, but was marginalized from her organization because of her support for male victims and was not invited to Refugee's 50th anniversary celebration a few weeks ago. So if the name Aaron Pizzi isn't instantly recognizable to you, then welcome to the topsy-turvy world of domestic violence provision, where not only is the key founder invisible, but around a third of the victims, the men, are invisible too. The Center for Male Psychology. I don't know if this is a reputable source. Aaron Patria Margaret Pizzi, born 19 February 1939, is an English ex-feminist, men's rights activist, and advocate against domestic violence and novelist. A men's rights activist. There you go. She's known for having started the first and currently the largest domestic violence shelter in the modern world, Refuge, then known as Chiswick Women's Aid, 1971. She's been the subject of bomb threats and boycotts because her experience and research into the issue led her to conclude that most domestic violence is reciprocal and that women are equally as capable of violence as men. These threats eventually led her to exile from the UK. Pizzi has said that the threats were from militant feminists. She has also stated that she is banned from the refuge she started, asserted that most of the domestic violence is reciprocal. She reached this conclusion when she asked the women in her refuge about their violence, only to discover most of them were equally violent or more violent than their husbands. In her study, Comparative Study of Battered Women and Violence-Prone Women, co-researched with John Gayford of Warlingham Hospital, Pizzi distinguished between genuine battered women and violence-prone women. This seems really victim-blamey, doesn't it? I feel like that right there is very, very sussy. I'm sorry, if you're already the victim of domestic violence, of course you're going to respond with violence. I don't know. Does this not seem very victim-blamey? I feel like it is. The former defined as the unwilling and innocent victim of his or her partner's violence, and the latter defined as the unwilling victim of his or her own violence. Your husband beat you. Did you beat him first? But it's not even that. It seems like violence prone. Here's what I'm reading here. It seems like she's distinguishing between the woman who sits there and like balled up in the corner crying with her hands over her head, not knowing what to do, versus the woman who, when her husband raises a fist at her, she raises a fist back. You know what I mean? That's not violence prone. That's just reciprocating, you know? That's defending yourself. And right now, it doesn't seem like there's a very good distinguishing factor here. It's just, was she violent or not? The latter, defined as the unwilling victim of his or her own violence. The study reported that 62% of the sample population were more accurately described as violence prone. 62% of women who were beat were violence prone. Similar findings regarding the mutuality of domestic violence have been confirmed in subsequent studies. In her book, Prone to Violence, Pizzi expressed concern that so little attention was paid to the causes of interpersonal and family violence, stating, "To my amazement, nobody seemed to genuinely want to find out why violent people treat each other the way they do." You know what? Actually, that part is true. Okay, there is a problem with men being violent, and I do have a genuine interest in correcting that problem, not just tossing these men in the slammer. You know what I mean? I want them to be fixed, quote unquote. There's a much better word for it, and it's not coming to my head. But it's still important to recognize that, like, they are the ones perpetuating the crime in most circumstances. She also expressed concern for the view expressed by government officials that solutions to the issue of domestic abuse and violence could be found in socialist or communist countries. Okay, so she's anti-socialist. Cool. Pizzi pointed out that marital violence was a great problem in Russia, and China addressed the issue by proclaiming wife beating a crime punishable by death sentence. Well, they're also not socialist. The book looks at what appeared to be learned behavior, often starting in childhood, like linked to hormonal responses. Pizzi describes such behavior as akin to addiction. She speculates that high levels of hormones and neurochemicals associated with pervasive childhood trauma led to adults who repeatedly engaged in violent altercations with intimate partners despite the physical, emotional, legal, and financial costs, in unwitting attempts to simulate the emotional impact of traumatic childhood experiences and manifest the learned biochemical state linked to pleasure. Well, I mean, that's just epigenetics, right? Like, yeah, you can make the argument that your environment led you to having a genetic predisposition for violence. You're getting into a nature versus nurture argument. It doesn't seem like that's trying to solve the problem. It seems like that's trying to make an excuse. You know what I mean? The book contains numerous stories of disturbed families alongside a discussion of the reasons why the modern state caretaking agencies are largely ineffective. Promotional events for the book were met with protest, and Pizzi reports that she herself and co-author Jeff Shapiro needed police protection during the promotional events for the book. In 1981, Pizzi moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, while targeted by harassment, death threats, bomb threats, and defamation campaigns and dealing with overwork, near collapse, cardiac disease, and mental strain. In particular, according to Pizzi, the charity Scottish Women's Aid, quote, made it their business to hand out leaflets, claiming that she believed that women invited violence and provoked male violence. She states that the turning point was the intervention of the bomb squad, who required all of her mail to be processed by them before she could receive it, as a controversial public figure. Having moved to Santa Fe to write, Pizzi promptly became involved in running a refuge in New Mexico, as well as dealing with sexual abusers and pedophiles. Okay. Pizzi said of this work, "I discovered that there were just as many women pedophiles as there were men. Women go undetected as usual." There is some truth to that. I don't know if there's as many as men. I feel like coming to that conclusion on your own without like a team of researchers is really jumping the gun. But certainly there is something to be said for women offenders of children, like abusers of children, that go completely like unreported. So there is truth to that, but that is a bit of an overstatement, what she said. Working against pedophiles is a very dangerous business. Whilst living in Santa Fe, one of her dogs was shot and 2 others were stolen, which she claims was a result of racist neighbors. Her family suffered new harassment following the publication of her 1982 book, Prone to Violence. Pizzi links much of the harassment to militant feminists and their objections to her research findings and work. Describing the harassment, Deborah Ross of The Independent wrote that the feminist sisterhood went bonkers. Following the abuse and threats in Santa Fe, she moved to Cayman Islands, where she wrote with her second husband, Jeff Shapiro. Subsequently, she moved to Siena, Italy, where her writing and advocacy work continued. Returned to London in the spring of 1997, homeless due to debt and increasingly poor health. Her insights are still sought by politicians. This seems like a very generous and kind of like ass-licking recalling of her history. Does it not? I almost guarantee that this was solely edited by men's rights activists. I'm like talking about her like she's a historical figure. Let's see her Twitter. Let's take it directly from the source. Shit. 7,298 followers. Let's see. What's this? Gender Studies for Men. I think I remember Erin saying that she estimated about 60 to 65% of the women she sheltered in her DV shelters were violent abusers themselves. Erin replies, I said 62 out forsook 100 women in the refuge were more violent than their partners. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the women were the ones who instigated the abuse. She's basically just saying, well, they're no angel, right? Yeah, no, this is just men's rights shit. Sign the petition. False allegations law. It's time to protect the innocent from false allegations. Wait, what is this? We live in a society. Period. End of story. That's true. That's probably the truest thing I've read all night and probably ever will read. We live in a society where innocent until proven guilty and accusations must have merit, and we are all equal under law, cornerstones of law and the Constitution. That is true. Recent events in family court have shown that meritless claims are believed and one party is automatically found guilty by default on nothing more than a maybe, could be, or perhaps, and the false accuser never gets held to account. It's time to safeguard ourselves from those who seek to destroy the credible and... Okay, I've heard this before. The amount that women falsely accuse men of sex crimes, like, is the same amount, statistically speaking, that anybody falsely accuses anybody else of sex crimes. On top of that, it is insanely hard to prove or disprove a sex crime had happened. Okay? Very, very difficult. So all you have to go on usually is he said, she said. And I got news for you. A lot of the time, much of the time, the man gets cut loose. He's not charged with anything because there's no objective evidence. It's insanely hard to prove. And since we go by innocent until proven guilty, and I do stand by we should go by innocent until proven guilty, unless you have a lot of people, like a lot of witnesses or a lot of like solid evidence backing you up, it is extremely hard to get a conviction. On top of that, you have people fighting you tooth and nail, conservatives usually, because men are afraid of getting falsely accused of sexual abuse, right? Like we kind of have that ingrained in us, unfortunately. Don't act weird toward women. You know, if she's drunk, you don't have sex with her, obviously. That's just a standard thing. What is a man? A miserable pile of secrets. I feel like it's just kind of beat into us that like anything that you do can be tossed back in your face as sexual abuse. You can literally, like, have you guys heard this one? You can have sex with a woman, and then if she regrets it later, she can turn around and say that you raped her. Have you heard that one? Because I have, and that almost never happens. I'm sure that it has, but that almost never happens, and they can't prove that it does. It's just a fear-mongering tactic. Not making excuses for abusers. Hashtag Rose Army is sheer hypocrisy. If actresses claim they didn't know Weinstein was a perv, liars. Why does she write this like she's like 16 years old? She looks like she's 160. This video is good advice for ladies. The hashtag Men Improvement Initiative will create more douchebags, not less. Think hashtag Fem Improvement, ladies.
The Men Improvement Initiative. This new feature means that you can give direct feedback to guys and you can tell them when they're being douchebags. This means that when you're talking to a guy and he says a comment that makes your eyes roll, then you can send him an animation.
She's so blurry. Well, she is British, so don't complain about a good thing, okay? Always censor the British face. They're not pleasant to look at.
2 eyes rolling. Tinder will collect this data and it will then have a list of all the guys that you think are douchebags. And it will target those guys and try and prompt them to change. Now, let's put aside the fact that this is incredibly sexist. This particular feature is only targeted at men, and it assumes that it's only...
Wait, what's the feature? Men Improvement Initiative. Oh, so wait, Tinder is like, basically, it's putting power into the hands of women, female creators on TikTok, to put that eye roll emoji in response to some person who is making an extraordinarily out of left field comment against women or against her, like a sexist comment, basically. And that will target them. That will like put a marker on them and say, okay, we're going to we're gonna tweak the algorithm a little bit for this guy so that he now gets targeted for more feminist positive stuff, right? I I mean, personally, like, will that work? I don't know, but like, it's not sexist. It's not it's not sexist. It's like, I don't know, like, I don't see a problem with that necessarily. Like, I think they should be probably they probably should be nicer to women if they're making comments like that, you know?
Now, let's put aside the fact that this is incredibly sexist.
Additionally, like, if you're a guy, you could also turn around and just do that to women. You know what I mean? And it's not like the women would get treated any differently. Like, if you get replied to with the eye roll emoji, all that does is mark you for those types of videos. And I don't know what the videos look like, but if they are what she's describing, they can't be that bad. It's literally just going to give you pro feminist content, which, whatever. Okay. So what?
This particular feature is
It
only
is also
targeted
sexist
at
to be
men,
sexist.
and it assumes that it's only men who can be douchebags.
Okay, so then reply with the eye roll emoji, and those people will get the same video. It's like, it doesn't just put the power in women's hands. You can do it too if you're a guy, I assume, right? You can just reply to anybody with his eye roll, and then they'll get a little bit more, like, don't be an asshole content. And guess what? The best part is, if you don't like a video, doink, you just go to the next one. That's what TikTok is. Like, I don't get it. And if you hate it, just quit using TikTok.
Let's put aside that fact just for a second, because that's not why I want to talk to you. The reason I'm doing this video is because this new feature is going to create more douchebags.
Okay, I get the idea. Basically, they're just bitching about nothing. It seems to me like Erin Pizzi is just not a good person. I'm sorry. She's the one that people can point to and be like, look, here's a woman who agrees with us. Here's a woman who agrees with us. She wrote theory about it, quote unquote theory, right? And I'm sure she has some ideas that I agree with, where it's like, yeah, women can absolutely be the perpetuators of domestic violence. They can be, and they have been, okay? 1000%, and we've talked about that. But on the other hand, they're usually not, They're like 9 times out of 10, I believe, they're not. Motherfuckers just acting like you can't just keep scrolling. I know, it's so bizarre to me. Like, obviously, if it's then taking your account and giving you, like, every single video you scroll through as a feminist piece of, like, a feminist shitty video, and it, like, completely modifies your account and it makes your experience shitty, then yeah, I guess you could maybe, possibly, potentially make that argument, right? That it's sexist. But at the same time, it's like, well, if that's the case, then literally just do it back to the other person. And then their timeline gets gunked up with that shit. You know what I mean? And then, of course, the app falls apart because people will just use it to troll them. Like troll everybody. I don't know. It just seems like a silly complaint. Back to what we were doing. The real enemies here are the mothers who keep giving birth to sexist babies. That's true. Women need to stop giving birth to sexists. Like, where do you think they come from, idiot? Okay, let's keep going. Constantly only care about stories from the perspective of female victimization. For example, in Islamic countries where they complain about the abuse of girls, boys are often abused just as much, but it doesn't draw in the eyes just as much, and neither appeals to what they really seek. Validating their own feelings, which, when I am most charitable, can be healing from trauma. But if you do that, just be honest and don't pretend to be a serious philosophical movement about equality, no less. I don't think that feminism has ever put down young boys who are abused by men. Like, if anything, they did the opposite. They're like, no, young boys get abused by men too, and that's a problem. And part of it is that they're abused, and that's part of a vicious cycle of abuse. So because young boys are abused by their dads or other adults' family members, they grow up and be violent douchebags. And they abuse their kids. And then those kids grow up and become the next abusers for the next generation. It's a vicious cycle. Pretty sure the philosophical movement about equality is called egalitarianism, not feminism. Feminism is an equality movement at its core. There are obviously feminists who, like, don't abide by that. And there's different sects, SECTS, of feminism, some that are better than others. And there are absolutely feminists who do take it to the extreme of like, well, women are just genetically better than men. And they're weirdos. And I'm not saying those don't exist, but like at its core, feminism was founded to be a movement of equality, right? Of equity, of making sure that women and men all have, and people of all genders, of course, all have the same type of opportunities and the same type of treatment by a broader society. That's how I understand it anyway. And even if that's not how you understand feminism, that's what I stand for. People are so caught up on labels that they forget what the fucking idea actually is. Portrayed marriage as an exploitative institution meant to suppress women for the benefit of men. I mean, you could certainly make that argument. I mean, it has been that way at many points in history. You know, like there were points not too long ago where women were literally like married off by their fathers, right? Their fathers just chose the guy that they would marry. I don't know if that's what it was invented for. I don't know if that's cross cultural, but it certainly has happened and even today continues to happen. So it can be that. Complaining in the 50s and 60s of how gender representation in university is unfair. In the 50s and 60s, of course it was unfair. Yeah, of course it was. Completely glossing over how many of the university students in the period they were describing have done it because of the GI Bill. You know, they had to be qualified after they fought in World War II. Okay, so there's a couple of things here. Obviously, there was a problem back then with men returning from World War II. The GI Bill, formerly known as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. We're learning today. We're doing a big old heckin' learn. Weren't unmarried women not allowed to have major credit cards in the 60s? I would not doubt that. I mean, they did not have very many rights in the 60s. They had the right to make you a sandwich, and that was about it. The GI Bill, formerly known as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, was a law that provided a range of benefits for some of the returning World War II veterans, commonly referred to as GIs. The original GI Bill expired in 1956, but the term GI Bill is still used to refer to programs created to assist some of the U.S. military veterans. Largely designed and passed through Congress in 1944 in a bipartisan effort led by the American Legion, who wanted to reward practically all wartime veterans. That's pretty sick. Since the First World War, the Legion had been in the forefront of lobbying Congress for generous benefits for war veterans. Roosevelt, by contrast, wanted a much smaller program focused on poor people, regardless of military service. I mean, smaller? No. Poor people? Yeah, sure. As historians Glenn C. Altshuler and Stuart Blumen pointed out, FDR did not play a significant role in the contours of the bill. At first, Roosevelt shared with nearly everyone the idea that satisfactory employment, not educational opportunity, was the key feature of the bill. This changed in the fall of 1944 when Roosevelt's special representative to the European theater, Anna M. Rosenberg, returned with her report on the GI's post-war expectations. From her hundreds of interviews with servicemen then fighting in France, it was clear they wanted educational opportunities previously unavailable to them. FDR lit up, Rosenberg recalled, and subsequent additions to the bill included provisions for higher education. That seems pretty sick. The final bill provided immediate financial rewards for practically all World War II veterans, thereby avoiding the highly disputed postponed life insurance policy payout for World War I veterans that had caused political turmoil in the 1920s and 30s. Benefits included low-cost mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business or farm, 1 year of unemployment compensation, and dedicated payments of tuition and living expenses to attend high school, college, or vocational school. What the fuck? What? Can we have that, please? Excuse me. I would like that. Thank you. That's awesome. Ugh. God. These benefits were available to all veterans who had been on active duty during the war years for at least 90 days and had not been dishonorably discharged. Okay, so we get the idea. His argument is that men came back from war and this bill was signed saying, hey, we're going to incentivize you guys to go to higher education, right? And that did lead to an uptick in the number of men who were in higher education. But I don't think even before that, by the way, like in the 20s and 30s, I have to imagine that higher education was still primarily composed of men. Features U.S. trends in education over the last century from 1919 to 2019 by examining how factors like race, gender, age, geography, enrollment rates, and curricular requirements correlate with educational attainment levels for various groups within the U.S. Aha! Enrollment in institutions of higher education by sex. Women have outpaced men in the rate of enrollment at higher education institutions, whereas in the difference in 1919 to 1920 and the early 1930s favored men with a 40% female enrollment rate. There you go. Now, post-secondary enrollment percentages have flipped, with women in 2015 making up 56%. So it was staggered in favor of men before the war, okay? So you can't use that as an excuse. It was still staggered in favor of men. So that kind of puts a dent in that argument. So it was a decent argument attempt that he made, but even before the war, men were in higher education for more than women were, by a pretty substantial margin. If you got 40% women, it's 60% men. Okay, that's a 20. That's a 10% difference there. Pretty significant. 20% difference, but I don't know. Anyway, even sex is portrayed as an effort of males, both in humans and the animal kingdom, to subjugate the females. In Beauvoir's *The Second Sex*, first chapter, it talks of how males assert their individuality. Even says bee worker drones live a life of privilege before their death. Whereas everything about the female's growth and reproduction alienates them. Have I told you yet how much I loathe materialists? Wait, bee worker drones live a life of privilege. They're drones. They don't even think, I don't think. Like, I can't state objectively that they don't think, but I don't typically think of bugs, at least bees and like colony bugs, like ants. I don't think that they think. I think that they just get told what to do by the queen, and it's more like a system, like like almost like a living neural network. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really have any feelings. It just kind of is. Whatever that is, it's bullshit. I mean, I do agree that there is kind of a cultural idea that sex is something that is sought after by males. And it is a little bit. We're socialized that way. It's something that males seek after, right? It's something that men seek to get, and it's something that women gatekeep, right? Like, men have to be the ones who go out and get it. Women are the ones who kind of receive the men. They kind of, women can basically match with whatever man they want for the most part. Men, on the other hand, are constantly swiping right, swiping right, swiping right, and they never get any matches. So the market certainly favors women in that regard. But that's all social elements. Portrayed men as forming their personhood around the oppression of women. Literally, Pateman saying being an individual is derived from property ownership, which is denied to women. Well, Pateman said being an individual is derived from property ownership. That sounds like a socialist point. It's not that easy, I know from experience, but you understand my point. Usually it is easier for women to get the attention of men and kind of whittle it down to the one they want. I do think that that's true. That's a generality, but it's not true for all women. Well, I think in the United States, it is true, at least here, and probably in a lot of other places, that like most people derive their value from the stuff they own, right? From property. That historically has been the case ever since capitalism came, more fully to power, is the shit you own is what you are, Like, we're a consumption culture here in the United States. So if you consider women your property, your personhood can be formed around the oppression of women. That is, I think that there is some accuracy to that statement. It's a little complicated. Only masculine beings are endowed with the attributes and capacities necessary to enter into contracts, the most important of which is ownership of property in the person. Only men, that is to say, are individuals. Well, that was true at a point, like women were property at some point. Even today, they promote such things according to themselves. Here's Philosophy Tube. Oh, I know that person. A feminist philosopher giving the context for the reason for a man accepting his job is because when he comes home, he at least gets to boss around his wife. That's true, though. That's one of the things that keeps the male workers in line, right? That goes back to socialism. Men get told what to do all day at work. They're the whipping boys, and then they get to come home and be the one who has the whip. Not to mention, men did patriarchy to themselves. Why should we help them? This actually is a sentiment that I see from a lot of leftists, and I don't like it. So I'll leave that where it is. Back to the original video. Okay, so we're back to my video. He just got through the tenets of feminism, and we went through that. I'm kind of trying to break this down as much as possible. Back to the original video. On top of what it whitewashes about feminism, look at what men's rights were the first to come to mind. Talk about your feelings, and now you can be more like women. Thank you for the effort, but no, I don't need to be like a woman, even if that's not stigmatized. We all know that women have different tendencies than men that are socialized, right? So my only point is, when you go out as a man in a dress, you are ostracized for that. I'm not saying this guy necessarily wants to go around, or even I want to go around wearing a dress, but the fact that I can't without being ostracized sucks. That kind of sucks to know that. Like, I can't just like put on some good looking fucking makeup and just go out and not have people turn their heads at me like I'm a fucking weirdo. I don't like that. The fact that I don't even have that choice. It depends on how cute you look. I'd hit it. Okay, try it in Texas. Yeah, good luck. Gender prejudice. We'd much more appreciate, I don't know, maybe not portraying masculinity as arbitrary, meaningless, and fake like Solari does. There are so many links. What is this? I think there are elements of masculinity that can certainly behave like a prison. But that's my point. These days, in many social elements, women have more freedom than men do. But what I mean by that is in terms of their expression, in terms of the way they're allowed to behave, in terms of social norms that are expected of them. Masculinity is an element of gender, and being a gender abolitionist myself, I do think that it is arbitrary as far as what characteristics we consider to be masculine. I mean, there was a time when it was peak masculinity to have a powdered wig, fuck ton of makeup on you, high heels, and not have a scratch on you, a bruise on you, a scar, anything, like, and being white as a fucking ghost. That was considered peak masculinity because that was considered privileged, right? You were somebody who didn't have to work the fields. You were somebody who didn't have to go get yourself injured chopping down a tree for wood because you had servants to do that for you. You were a real man's man because you owned everything, you know? And so you didn't have to do any work. That at one time was considered peak masculinity, but that changed over time. So it is arbitrary. It is absolutely arbitrary. No doubt about it. This is much more minor. Eliminate the caricature of the man as a lumbering slob or the goofy father for which the wife has to be the mature one. Okay, but there are caricatures of men and women all over media. So this just seems like he's whining. But again, masculinity isn't meaningless / arbitrary, matters more. Maybe that would be a worthwhile use of your effort if the most important to you is gender biases. Well, it's not meaningless. I mean, I consider myself a masculine person and I enjoy being a masculine person, but I'm only masculine in terms of today's standards. It's not fake, it's not meaningless, but it is arbitrary, absolutely arbitrary. And arbitrary does not mean meaningless, mind you. Okay, those are different words for a reason. We have heard feminists talk about, I don't know, circumcision at similar rates to FGM, considering it's more widespread. No, I agree with this point as well. Circumcision needs to be done away with. And most feminists, at least the ones that I know, would agree with that. Although female genital mutilation, I would have to look into it more, but I think female genital mutilation is a lot more complete than circumcision. Because as a circumcised male myself, I have lost my Skittle pouch, unfortunately. No longer can I hold Skittles at all. I spill them everywhere. I still enjoy sex, right? I still have nerve endings and I can enjoy sex. I think when you talk about female genital mutilation, is like, it's more complete. Like they're trying to stop women from enjoying sex at all. The fact that women could even have any modicum of pleasure from sex is a sin in their eyes. I'm pretty sure that's what they're going for when they mutilate girls. So I think that female genital mutilation tends to be more egregious, even if it's not as widespread. Both are a huge problem. I do agree with him that circumcision needs to be abolished. But, you know, this is like comparing punching a child in the eye to like pulling their eye out. Even if more boys are punched in the eye, the fact that you would pull the eye out of some women is, you know, pretty bad. Maybe analyze why charities for men's causes always get less support, even contribute to them themselves. I can't speak to that. I have no clue. I think if people are contributing to something, that's better than nothing. Efforts to increase men's programs now that they're under half of college graduates. This one is true, actually. And I think I've talked about this before. We've discovered that the educational system is actually a little bit biased against young boys. It favors the social conditions more that girls are raised in. Boys are taught to be more aggressive. They're taught to be more, you know, manly, I guess, for lack of better terms. They're more outspoken. They're more restless. And girls are usually socialized to be more quiet, to pay attention more, to be more thoughtful, right? So I think there is a problem and that needs to be addressed. But I think that feminism does address it. No, they either ignore problems like these or others or want to distance at all costs from being associated with men's rights if they ever do it or pay lip service to doing it. And typical case scenario for the last one, they ignore how popular culture chastises men for not being marriage material for women with 2 degrees, which want the same in their husbands. This last part is, honestly, you could address this last part with economic changes, right? Leveling the economic playing field. Because who goes to college? People with money, right? And if you don't have money, you get loans. And if you can't get loans, either because your credit sucks or you didn't, you know, like it just didn't work out for you or whatever, then you go work a fucking 12-hour day, 6-day a week minimum wage job and scrape by, barely. But that could be solved with economic changes, right? It doesn't have to be like a man versus woman thing. Funniest part is 2 minutes before I quoted the quote I opened with, someone from his own audience said that, quote, misogyny needs to be fought first before we worry about sympathy for men. Sorry. So even his own lack of self-awareness of who he is talking to is abysmal. No, I knew my audience. It was probably Tina who said that. And honestly, I disagree with Tina on that, okay? I think me and Tina have personal disagreements as far as like how important it is for us to address men's issues, okay? And, you know, my audience will disagree with me sometimes. That's just a thing that happens. I think even in the video, I addressed some of those disagreements, you know? Like I had to say, hey, you know, like I don't agree with that. That's my audience you're talking about. Also, 1 minute after he went, look at feminism's definition and goals, so the logic feminism can't be anti-men, it's about equality comes in. No, feminism is not for equality, it's anti-patriarchy, which was something they see done by men and self-hating women, and it blames all gender problems for it. Patriarchy hurts both men and women. There are certainly weirdo women who think that the patriarchy is just a thing that all men are a part of and contribute to. I think that's really fucking stupid. But those people do exist and we have to contend with them. And I think if you look at the core message of feminism, it would say that's ridiculous. Okay? It's not trying to place women in a tier that's higher than men. And it's not saying that all men are evil. It's saying that all men are part of a system that places men above women in many categories. And that is true. Okay. It's baked into the system. There are similarities to draw with how black and white works, right? There are discriminatory factors baked into our society that make it harder for black people to achieve what white people can, right? That doesn't mean that black people never do it. That doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means it's much, much harder in many circumstances and for many reasons. Same goes between men and women, okay? It doesn't mean that men have it better in all aspects either, right? Finally, 2 minutes after Tell Me, Alec, are those stupid reasons to oppose feminism. Their own actions and beliefs showing how they're constantly hostile to both men and history, and how they'd use any defeat as ammo to blame on the same I have to reread that. Hostile to history. The only historical point that he made was about post-World War II soldiers coming back and getting college scholarships. And that's why men had a higher enrollment rate. But like the only point he made about history was the post World War II thing. It seems like he's cherry picking the heck out of history to support his anti-feminist agenda. Yeah, exactly. Like here's my problem. It doesn't seem like he's criticizing feminism for like the betterment of all of us. You know what I mean? It seems like he's doing it because feminism bad, bro. Like he's not actually addressing root problems here. My belief is that feminism addresses root problems in our society. And he doesn't really seem to care in this post about those root problems. He's just saying, no, feminism bad, period, end of story, right? He doesn't care about making these problems go away. He cares about feminism bad. That was his full post. So let's go over some of the comments, because this post did have like over 500 likes. It's a smokescreen to absorb men's rights into, quote, not happening until we get women's rights, which will never be enough for them because the permanent revolution will always move the goalposts. No, like it's not a zero-sum game. We all get rights, okay? Everybody gets rights. Look under your seats. You will see rights. Everybody look under your seats. You get rights. Like, come on. That's what I'm getting at. He says when men are dominant, it's taking opportunities away from women. When women are dominant, it means men are not rising up to satisfy women's needs. It's almost like you can't win with these people. I've never seen that. Well, you know what? Actually, I take that back. I have seen that from weirdo liberals. Basically, feminists will play lip service to men's rights if directly questioned. But in reality, no policy supported by the movement has ever been aimed at advancing men's rights, and many have even worsened this inequality. Wait. Which policies? Given the loudest proponents, I think that feminism is a mainstream hate group. Wow. And I tend to view anyone who claims to be part of that group warily. I've saved some of the reference points above in the events that I'm challenged with my views. I simply provide them and ask the listener to change the target of the group from men to Latinos or black people and ask them what they think. Wait, what do you mean? Do you mean like the crime rate of men and how it's higher? I've addressed that. And I've literally told people like you can't come at me with the whole like men are violent because they commit more crime thing. Like I've made that point. These people are so fucking stupid, I swear. They're all such fucking morons. Like, I'm sorry. Dude, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. The people in your comments are fucking stupid. Feminists have actively lobbied for and won laws that discriminate against men. Like what? Like what? Do you have any examples? Women's Educational Equality Act. The Women's Educational Equality Act of 1974 is one of the several landmark laws passed by the United States Congress outlining federal protections against the gender discrimination of women in education. WEEA was enacted as Section 513 of PL 93-380. Introduced in the United States House of Representatives by Congresswoman Patsy Mink of Hawaii, the legislation was conceived and drafted by Arlene Horowitz, a staff assistant to the Education Subcommittee on which Mink served. WEEA was intended to combat sex role stereotyping in elementary and secondary schools. In 1982, Leslie Wolf, WEEA's director, when Ronald Reagan was elected to U.S. presidency, was transferred out of that position, and people aligned with Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum were brought in to review grants proposals being considered for WEEA funds. In 1984, Congress rewrote the WEEA legislation, making its mission and purpose more explicit and therefore keeping its actions true to its original goal. During the Reagan administration, the Assistant Secretary of Education, Jean Benish, implemented a review process which included all walks of people and provided a fair and equitable grant review process, which was all-inclusive of women's issues. In 1984, Congress rewrote the WEA legislation, making its mission and purpose more explicit. The Women's Educational Equality Act authorizes grants to develop non-sexist curricula, personnel training programs, and vocational and career counseling. In addition to these grants, the improvement of physical education programs is also included. These funds helped education facilities to meet the requirements of Title IX. It was just Title IX improvements. They're just bitching over Title IX improvements that say you can't be sexist. Adding women to affirmative action. Yeah, because women overwhelmingly have less, they're economically underprivileged, is my point. Women overwhelmingly, especially probably when that was written, were overwhelmingly underprivileged. Women owned business advantages. Healthcare mandates for women under Obamacare. Wait, healthcare mandates for women under Obamacare? Wait, you mean like abortion? Are they just mad that they got protections for abortion? Is that what that is? Biased Title IX, sexual assault interpretations of okay, this is stupid. Really bad examples. Women don't have affirmative action quotas. Not only did it never happen, the Supreme Court ruled against that possibility. VAWA is not discriminatory against men. What do you have against that? The name of the law, so basically semantics. WEA wasn't discriminatory against men and doesn't exist anymore. It's incredible how bad your examples are. You're literally proving all the time that there's no institutional discrimination against men. That's great. Feminism is equal rights by definition. If a policy or person is not for equal rights, it is not feminism. It is a discrimination whichever way it falls. That's a true Scotsman fallacy. That is literally a true Scotsman fallacy. I will give them that one. That was a review of my video. I found it lacking. Honestly, I was kind of hoping for better because, like, at the end of the day, I don't give a shit if you actually call it feminism or not. I don't even say that often that I am a feminist, which I am, but I don't say it that often because I don't even think it's that useful. The big part to me is not being a male feminist. The big part to me is the underlying policies and prescriptions, okay? This is the same thing as like the question of what is a woman. I don't give a shit what a woman is. I give a shit about people. I care about what the policy is. I care about what the outcome is. That's what I care about. So whatever you want to fucking call it, if you want to call it feminism, if you want to call it socialism, if you want to call it just equal rights, whatever. You want to call it fucking men's rights? Sure, whatever. I don't care. The policy, the outcome, that's what matters. So I feel like when I bring him on, the argument's going to be like, whoa, feminism actually bad because it do this and that. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what are your core values? What do you want to see happen? Because what I want to see happen is gendered barriers broken. I want to see equality of opportunity. I want to see women and men and otherwise all living together, all functioning together, all able to achieve what they want, all able to live their lives as best as possible. That's what I want. That's it. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you want to see more. Hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload. You can join my channel membership at youtube.com/AlecGunther/TTV/join for only 99 cents a month. That's less than the price of a blowjob from your mom. You can be part of the channel membership program and you will get early access content as well as a sweet badge next to your name and exclusive emojis in the comments that nobody else gets. Thank you again, and I will see you all in the next video.